The morning light filtered through the massive windows of Station Harmony 7, casting long shadows across the polished floors of the Xenobiology Academy. Professor Veltan adjusted his crystalline form as he walked down the corridor, his translucent, body catching and reflecting the artificial sunlight. Today was special. Today, his Advanced Predator Studies class would meet their new exchange student. The classroom buzzed with nervous energy as students filed in for the morning session. Gilsu, tall and graceful with his see-through skin, took his usual seat near the front. His people, the Etherians, came from a peaceful world where the biggest threat was bad weather. He found Predator studies both fascinating and terrifying. Nari clicked into the room next, her forearms carrying multiple data tablets. The chitinous plates covering her body rattled softly as she moved. Her species, the Quellans, were natural builders and engineers. They had eliminated most dangerous creatures from their world centuries ago through careful planning and technology. Wanbin scurried to his seat, his large eyes darting around the room. The small, furry Kitherian was barely 3 feet tall, and everything seemed big to him. His people were gatherers and artists who lived in harmony with the gentle creatures of their forest world. The idea of studying predators made his fur stand on end. Other students settled into their seats. There was Do-hyun, a scaled Ventaran whose people lived underwater. His species had never developed land predators because they stayed safely in their ocean cities. Mi Young represented the Florians, a plant-like species who got their energy from their sun. The concept of hunting for food was completely alien to her. Professor Veltan entered the classroom with measured steps. His crystalline features reflected the morning light as he looked over his students. This was his favorite class to teach. Most species in the galaxy came from safe worlds, and studying predators helped them understand the wider universe. Good morning, class, Professor Veltan said, his voice carrying the musical quality of his species. Today marks the beginning of our most exciting semester yet. The students leaned forward with interest. Professor Veltan was known throughout the academy for his engaging lessons and real-world examples. As you know, we will be studying Apex, predators from various death worlds across the galaxy. These creatures represent the pinnacle of evolutionary adaptation for survival and hunting. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. But this semester we have something unprecedented. We have a living example. Confused murmurs rippled through the classroom. Gilsu's skin flickered with uncertainty. Nari's plates rattled. More quickly, Wanbin's eyes grew even larger, if that was possible. I am pleased to introduce our exchange student from the Terran Educational Authority. Professor Veltan gestured toward the door. Please welcome Tai-Ho from the Death World Earth. The classroom fell silent. Every student had heard of Earth. It was legendary throughout the galaxy as one of the most hostile planets ever discovered. Stories spread through space stations and colonies about the creatures that lived there. Giant predators with massive teeth. Venomous creatures that could kill with a single bite. Flying hunters that swooped down from the sky. And the apex predator of this nightmare world was humanity itself. The door slid open, and Tai-Ho walked in. The students stared in shock. This was not what they expected. Tai-Ho was average height, maybe 5.5 feet tall. His build was lean, but not overly muscular. He wore the standard academy robes like everyone else. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his brown eyes looked calm and friendly. He carried a simple bag over one shoulder. He looked normal. Gilsu blinked his large eyes, his skin returning to its normal transparency. This human looked nothing like the battle-scarred warrior he had imagined. Nari's plates stopped rattling as she studied the newcomer with scientific interest. Wonbin's fur began to settle as his fear decreased. "Hello, everyone," Taeho said in perfect Galactic Standard, his voice warm and pleasant. "I'm excited to be here. I've always been interested in learning about different species and their worlds." He smiled, and several students smiled back. The tension in the room began to fade. Some students even looked disappointed. After all the stories about terrifying Deathworlders, this human seemed almost boring. Professor Veltan noticed the change in atmosphere and smiled to himself. He had seen this reaction before when species first met humans. The reality was often very different from the legends. "Please, take a seat anywhere you're comfortable," Professor Veltan told Taeho. Taeho chose an empty seat in the middle of the classroom, nodding politely to the students around him. Mi Young, the plant-like Florian, leaned over to whisper, "Are you really from Earth?" "Born and raised," Taeho replied quietly. "Though I spent most of my time in libraries and museums, I'm more interested in studying life than hunting it." This seemed to reassure the nearby students even more. A scholar, not a warrior. Someone like them. Professor Veltan cleared his throat to regain attention. "Now that we're all here, let me outline what we'll be studying this semester. We'll examine predator behavior, hunting strategies, and ecosystem roles. We'll use holographic simulations, recorded observations, and..." He paused dramatically. "Live specimens." The nervousness returned to the room instantly. Live specimens meant real predators, dangerous ones. "Our first subject will arrive tomorrow," Professor Veltan continued. "A Zephyrian shadow stalker, a mid-tier predator from a Class 4 death world. This creature represents an excellent example of evolutionary hunting perfection." Wonbin raised a tiny, trembling hand. How big is it?" "About 4 feet tall. At the shoulder," Professor Veltan replied, "roughly the size of what humans call a large dog, though infinitely more dangerous. It has retractable claws that can cut through titanium steel alloy, lightning-fast reflexes, and paralyzing venom." The description sent shivers through most of the class. Do-hyun's scales changed color with stress. Mi Young's leaves rustled nervously. Gil-su's skin became completely opaque, a sign of extreme anxiety in his species, but Taeho just nodded with interest, as if Professor Veltan had described a particularly interesting rock formation. "The creature will be safely contained in our most advanced containment field," Professor Veltan assured them. "You'll be able to observe its behavior and hunting instincts without any danger." As the class continued, Professor Veltan explained their schedule and assignments. The students took notes on their tablets, though many kept glancing at Taeho. The human seemed genuinely interested in everything, asking thoughtful questions about predator evolution and ecosystem balance. When class ended, several students approached Taeho with curiosity. The initial fear had been replaced by fascination. Here was someone from the most dangerous world in the galaxy, and he seemed as gentle as any of them. "What's Earth really like?" Gil-su asked, his transparency returning to normal levels. Taeho considered the question. "Beautiful," he said simply. "Dangerous, yes, but beautiful. We have forests and oceans, mountains and deserts. The creatures there are amazing, even the predators. They're just trying to survive like everyone else." Nari clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. But how do you sleep at night, knowing there are so many dangerous things around? Taeho smiled. The same way you sleep knowing your technology might fail, or the way Do-hyun sleeps knowing the ocean currents might change. You adapt. You learn. You respect the dangers but don't let fear control your life. As the students filed out of the classroom, Professor Veltan watched with satisfaction. The semester was off to an excellent start. Having a human in class would provide perspectives that no textbook could offer. Tomorrow they would meet their first live predator. Professor Veltan was curious to see how the students would react, especially Taeho. The professor had studied many species over his long career, but humans remained one of the most fascinating. They looked so harmless, yet came from the most hostile world known to galactic civilization. They seemed gentle and scholarly, yet their planet had forged them into something that even other predators respected. Tomorrow would be very interesting indeed. The next morning brought an electric tension to the Advanced Predator Studies classroom. Students arrived earlier than usual, clustering in small groups and speaking in hushed voices. Today they would see their first live predator of the semester. Gil-soo sat rigidly in his chair, his normally transparent skin flickering between clear and opaque as his anxiety built. He had spent the previous evening researching Zephyrian shadow stalkers, and the information had not helped his nerves. Nari's forearms moved constantly, checking and rechecking her recording equipment. Her chitinous plates created a soft, nervous rhythm against her chair. Bin had barely slept. The small Catherian's large eyes were even more prominent than usual, and his fluffy fur stood slightly on end despite his attempts to smooth it down. Mi Young's leaves rustled with each breath, a sign of stress in her plant-like species. Taeho entered the classroom at his usual time, carrying the same simple bag. He looked well-rested and calm, offering friendly nods to his classmates as he took his seat. His relaxed demeanor stood out sharply against the nervous energy filling the room. "Good morning, Taeho," Do-hyun said, his scales shifting to a worried blue-green color. "Are you nervous about today?" Taeho tilted his head thoughtfully. "Curious, mostly. I've read about shadow stalkers but never seen one in person. Should be interesting." Several students stared at him in amazement. Bin leaned over from his seat. "Aren't you scared? This thing could probably kill all of us in seconds if it got loose." "The containment field is rated for creatures 3 times more dangerous," Taeho replied calmly. "Besides, fear and respect are different things. I respect what the creature can do, but that doesn't mean I have to be afraid of it." Professor Veltan entered the classroom, his crystalline body reflecting the overhead lights in complex patterns. Behind him walked 2 technicians in protective gear, guiding a large rectangular containment unit on a hovering platform. "Good morning, class," Professor Veltan announced. "I trust you all completed your assigned reading on Zephyrian fauna?" Nervous murmurs confirmed that they had. Professor Veltan smiled, an expression that created rainbow patterns across his transparent features. "Excellent. Today you will observe a living shadow stalker in a controlled environment. This specimen was bred in captivity specifically for educational purposes. It has never hunted in the wild, but it retains all the instincts and capabilities of its species." The technicians positioned the containment unit in the center of the classroom and began activating the systems. A soft humming filled the air as the containment field generators powered up. Blue energy barriers materialized, forming a transparent cage about 10 feet on each side. "Before we begin," Professor Veltan continued, "let me review safety protocols. Under no circumstances should anyone approach the containment field. While the barriers are strong enough to hold our subject, they are not designed to withstand tampering. Keep your seats, remain quiet, and observe. Gilsu's skin went completely opaque. Nari's plates rattled like castanets. Wanbin gripped his chair with tiny, white-knuckled hands. Professor Veltan nodded to the technicians. One of them pressed a series of controls on his tablet. The opaque walls of the containment unit slowly became transparent, revealing what lay within. Several students gasped. Mi Young's leaves rustled so loudly it sounded like wind through a forest. The Zephyrian Shadow Stalker was magnificent and terrifying. Its body was sleek and powerful, covered in scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The creature stood nearly 4 feet tall at the shoulder, with a build that spoke of explosive strength and perfect balance. Its head was elongated and predatory, with a jaw designed for crushing bone. But it was the eyes that captured everyone's attention. 6 of them, arranged in pairs along the sides and front of its skull. Each eye glowed with an inner light like molten gold, and they moved independently, constantly scanning its environment. The Shadow Stalker paced within its containment field with fluid grace. Each step was perfectly placed, each movement economical and purposeful. When it turned, its body flowed like liquid darkness. Its tail, tipped with what looked like a blade of bone, moved in slow, hypnotic patterns. "Observe the musculature," Professor Veltan said, his voice steady despite the presence of the predator. "Every part of this creature is designed for hunting. The rear legs can generate enough force to launch it 30 meters in a single leap. The front claws can extend to nearly 6 inches in length and are sharp enough to cut through most metals." As if responding to his words, the Shadow Stalker paused and extended its claws. They emerged from hidden sheaths with a sound like blades being drawn. Several students flinched at the metallic scraping noise. "Note the head structure, Professor," Veltan continued. "The jaw can exert over 2,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. The 6-eye arrangement provides nearly 360-degree vision with exceptional depth perception. This creature has no blind spots," Wanbin whimpered quietly. Duhyun's scales had turned a pale, sickly color. Even Nari, usually fascinated by biological engineering, seemed overwhelmed by the predator's presence. But Taeho leaned forward with obvious interest. His brown eyes tracked the creature's movements with the same intensity he might use to study a particularly complex equation. There was no fear in his expression, only scientific curiosity. The Shadow Stalker suddenly stopped, pacing and focused all 6 eyes on the students. It had noticed them. For a long moment, predator and prey studied each other through the containment field. Gilsu made a small, terrified sound, and his skin became so opaque it looked almost solid. The Shadow Stalker's head turned toward the noise, and its eyes brightened. "With interest. It's assessing us," Professor Veltan explained quietly. "In the wild, Shadow Stalkers spend considerable time studying potential prey before attacking. They're highly intelligent hunters." The creature began to pace again, but now its movements had purpose beyond simple restlessness. It was testing the boundaries of its containment, carefully exploring the edges of the energy field with its snout. When it touched the barrier, small sparks of blue energy danced across its scales. "The containment field creates a mild electrical feedback," Professor Veltan noted. "Not painful, but uncomfortable enough to discourage escape attempts." As if it understood his words, the Shadow Stalker backed away from the field and sat down, wrapping its bladed tail around its feet. But its 6 eyes never stopped moving, never stopped watching. "Now, let's discuss hunting strategies," Professor Veltan said, pulling up holographic displays around the containment unit. Shadow stalkers are ambush predators. They prefer to strike from concealment, using their natural light absorption, abilities to blend with shadows. The creature in the containment field seemed to respond to the discussion by demonstrating. Its scales shifted, becoming even darker, until it was barely visible against the shadowed areas of its enclosure. Only its glowing eyes remained clearly visible. Mi-Young's leaves stopped rustling entirely as her species' version of holding her breath. Wanbin had closed his large eyes and was counting quietly to himself, a calming technique his people used in stressful situations. But then, something strange happened. As Professor Veltan continued his lecture, Tae-ho began to relax visibly. His posture became more casual, and he even smiled slightly as he watched the Shadow Stalker's demonstration. Nari noticed this and leaned over. "How can you be so calm?" she whispered, her mandibles clicking with stress. Tae-ho glanced at her, then back at the predator. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "Look at how perfectly adapted it is. Every part of its body has a purpose. It's like watching millions of years of evolution in action." "But it's terrifying," Nari protested. "It's efficient," Tae-ho corrected. "There's a difference. This creature isn't evil or malicious. It's just very, very good at what it does." The Shadow Stalker's head turned toward them, as if it had heard the whispered conversation. For a moment, its 6 golden eyes focused entirely on Tae-ho. The human met its gaze without flinching, and something passed between them. Not communication exactly, but a moment of mutual recognition. Then the creature looked away, returning its attention to the general class. Professor Veltan noticed the exchange but said nothing. Instead, he continued with his lesson, explaining the Shadow Stalker's role in its ecosystem and its hunting patterns. The students took notes, though most of them kept their eyes on their tablets rather than the predator itself. As the class period drew to a close, a soft chime indicated a minor. "System alert." One of the technicians checked his tablet and frowned. "Minor fluctuation in the containment field," he reported to Professor Veltan. "Nothing serious, but we should run diagnostics after class." Professor Veltan nodded. "Very well, we'll conclude. Today's observation here." The technician began the process of making the containment unit opaque again, hiding the Shadow Stalker from view. As the walls solidified, the creature gave one last look at the students. Its 6 eyes seemed to linger on Tae-ho for just a moment longer than the others. For next class, Professor Veltan announced as students began packing their things, "Please read chapters 12 through 15 on predator behavior patterns. We'll be observing feeding behaviors tomorrow." As the classroom emptied, students clustered in the hallway, discussing what they had seen. 3 days had passed since the first demonstration, and the Advanced Predator Studies class had settled into a routine. Each morning brought new observations of the Shadow Stalker, and each day the students grew slightly more comfortable with the creature's presence. Professor Veltan was pleased with their progress, though he noticed that only Tae-ho seemed truly at ease during the lessons. The morning of the 4th day started normally. Students filed into the classroom, chatting quietly about their other courses and upcoming assignments. Gilsu had regained some of his natural transparency, though his skin still flickered when he looked directly at the containment unit. Nari had stopped her constant plate rattling and was taking detailed notes on predator locomotion for her engineering studies. Wanbin remained nervous, but had discovered that sitting behind Tae-ho made him feel safer. The small Catherian had convinced himself that humans, being from an even more dangerous world, would naturally protect others from threats. Tai-Ho seemed unaware of this arrangement, or if he was aware, he didn't mind. Professor Veltan began the day's lesson by activating the containment unit's transparency mode. The Shadow Stalker materialized in its energy cage, looking as magnificent and dangerous as ever. Today's topic was advanced hunting behaviors, and Professor Veltan had prepared several holographic simulations to accompany the live demonstration. Today we'll observe how Shadow Stalkers adapt their hunting strategies based on different types of prey, Professor Veltan announced. The holographic projections will simulate various creatures from the Shadow Stalker's native environment. He activated the first simulation. A small rabbit-like creature appeared in the containment field with the Shadow Stalker. The hologram was so realistic it seemed solid, complete with natural movements and behaviors. The Shadow Stalker's response was immediate and impressive. All 6 eyes focused on the simulated prey, and its body dropped into a perfect hunting crouch. It moved with incredible patience, taking nearly 5 minutes to position itself for an optimal strike. Note the stalking behavior, Professor Veltan commented. Shadow Stalkers can remain motionless for hours when hunting. Their metabolism can slow dramatically to conserve energy during long hunts. The students watched in fascination as the predator demonstrated techniques that millions of years of evolution had perfected. Even the most nervous among them couldn't help but appreciate the creature's deadly grace. But in the depths of Station Harmony 7, something was going wrong. The station's central computer core had been processing routine updates when a cascade error began propagating through the network. It started small, just a minor glitch in a subsystem that handled environmental controls for the lower decks. But the error found a weakness in the code that connected different systems, and it began to spread. On Deck 7, the lights in a storage bay flickered. On Deck 12, a food synthesizer produced soup that was 3 degrees too cold. In the recreation area, a holographic tennis game briefly showed purple grass instead of green. The errors were minor, easily correctable, but they were happening everywhere at once. The station's automated systems began trying to fix themselves. But each correction seemed to create 2 new problems. Professor Veltan continued his lesson, unaware of the growing chaos in the station's computer networks. The Shadow Stalker had successfully caught its holographic prey and was now being presented with a new simulation, a larger creature that would require different tactics. Then the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the classroom in a red glow. Professor Veltan frowned and checked his tablet, but before he could access the station's status reports, the lights came back on. Minor power fluctuation, he assured his students. Nothing to worry about. But Tai-Ho was frowning. Something about the brief outage felt wrong. On Earth, sudden power failures often meant something big was about to go wrong. It was the kind of pattern recognition that kept humans alive on a death world. The lesson continued for another 10 minutes. The Shadow Stalker performed beautifully, demonstrating hunting techniques that impressed even Professor Veltan. The creature seemed to enjoy the mental stimulation of the simulated hunts, and its movements were more fluid and confident than usual. Then the alarms started. A soft chime echoed through the classroom, followed by an automated announcement. Attention! Station Harmony 7. We are experiencing minor technical difficulties. All non-essential systems are being temporarily shut down for maintenance. Thank you for your patience. Professor Veltan's crystalline features reflected concern. Minor technical difficulties was code for something more serious than a simple power glitch. He began accessing emergency protocols on his tablet. That was when the containment field failed. It didn't shut down gradually or throw sparks. One moment, the blue energy barriers were there, solid and reassuring. The next moment, they were gone, vanishing as if they had never existed. The Shadow Stalker stood in the center of the classroom, completely free. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The Predator seemed as surprised as everyone else, turning its 6 golden eyes toward the space where the barriers had been. It took a cautious step forward, then another, testing whether this new freedom was real. The students reacted with the terror of prey animals suddenly exposed to their natural enemy. Gilsu's skin went from transparent to completely opaque in an instant, his body locking up in paralyzed fear. Nari's 4 arms clutched her desk so hard her claws left scratches in the metal. Her chitinous plates locked together in a defensive shell that left her unable to move. Wanbin fainted immediately, his small body toppling from his chair with a soft thud. Mi Young's leaves rustled so violently it sounded like a windstorm, her plant-like form swaying as panic overtook her nervous system. Du Hyun's scales shifted through every color in his species' fear spectrum before settling on a pale, sickly white. Other students pressed themselves against the walls, their various species' flight instincts all screaming the same message: run. But their bodies wouldn't obey. Millions of years of evolution had taught their ancestors to freeze when faced with a predator, hoping to avoid notice. The instinct was so strong that rational thought couldn't overcome it. Professor Veltan tried desperately to access emergency controls on his tablet, but the cascading system failures had reached the classroom's safety protocols. The emergency containment barriers wouldn't activate. The security alerts weren't being transmitted. Even the door locks had failed. The Shadow Stalker completed its exploration of the former containment area and turned its attention to the room full of potential prey. Its 6 eyes swept across the terrified students, and its body language changed. The casual curiosity was replaced by something far more dangerous: hunting instinct. The creature could smell their fear. It could hear their elevated heartbeats, see their small movements as they tried not to breathe too loudly. Every signal told the Shadow Stalker the same thing. These were prey animals, and they were helpless. The predator's muscles bunched as it prepared to strike. Its target was clear: Nari, whose chitinous shell made her look like the arthropod creatures it hunted on its homeworld. Her defensive position actually made her more appealing as prey, triggering deeply ingrained hunting responses. The Shadow Stalker's claws extended with their characteristic metallic scraping sound. Its tail blade gleamed in the emergency lighting. Every line of its body spoke of imminent violence. And then Taeho stood up. He didn't jump to his feet or make any sudden movements. He simply rose from his chair with the same calm deliberation he used for everything else. His chair made a soft scraping sound against the floor as he pushed it back. The Shadow Stalker's head snapped toward the new movement, all 6 eyes focusing on this creature that was behaving differently from the others. Where the other students had frozen in terror, this one was moving with purpose. Taeho took a step forward, placing himself directly between the Shadow Stalker and Nari. He didn't crouch into a fighting stance or raise his hands defensively. He simply stood there, looking directly at the predator with calm, steady eyes. The Shadow Stalker paused, confused. This was not prey behavior. Prey animals ran or froze. They didn't move toward danger. They didn't make eye contact with predators. They certainly didn't position themselves as obstacles between a hunter and its chosen target. Tae-ho took another step forward. The movement was deliberate and controlled, with no trace of fear or aggression. It was the movement of something that had every right to be exactly where it was. For the first time in its life, the Zephyrian Shadow Stalker felt uncertainty. Something was wrong. This creature looked like prey, bipedal, soft-skinned, apparently unarmed. But it was behaving like something else entirely. It was behaving like a predator. The Shadow Stalker's golden eyes studied Tae-ho more carefully. The human's posture was relaxed but ready. His breathing was controlled. His eyes never wavered from the predator's gaze. There was no fear scent, no elevation in heart rate, no signs of the panic that should overwhelm any prey animal in this situation. Instead, there was something the Shadow Stalker had never encountered before: the presence of another apex predator. The creature took a step backward, its hunting instincts suddenly sending confused signals. Everything about this bipedal creature suggested it should be easy prey. The standoff between human and Shadow Stalker stretched across seconds that felt like hours. The classroom had become utterly silent except for the soft hum of emergency lighting and the barely audible breathing of terrified students. Tae-ho remained, perfectly still, his brown eyes locked with 6 golden ones. The Shadow Stalker had stopped retreating but hadn't advanced either. The creature's massive head tilted slightly, studying this impossible situation. Every instinct told it that the soft, apparently defenseless biped should be running or cowering. Instead, this human was claiming territory like an equal. Nari, still frozen behind her shell of plates, could see past Tae-ho to the predator beyond. She couldn't understand what was happening. The human hadn't made any threatening gestures, hadn't shown weapons, hadn't even raised his voice. Yet somehow, he had stopped a creature that could tear through steel with its claws. Wonbin lay unconscious on the floor, his small body having shut down completely from terror. Gilsu's opaque skin flickered occasionally, but he remained locked in place. Mi Young's leaves had gone completely still, as if her plant-like biology had decided to play dead until the danger passed. Professor Veltan watched in fascination as predator psychology played out before his eyes. His crystalline features reflected the emergency lighting in complex patterns as he tried to process what he was witnessing. This wasn't in any textbook. This went beyond anything in the scientific literature. The Shadow Stalker took another step backward, and a soft growl rumbled in its throat. But the sound wasn't aggressive or threatening. It was questioning, almost confused. The creature's tail moved in agitated patterns, and its claws extended and retracted repeatedly. Tae-ho finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Easy there." The words were in Galactic Standard, but his tone carried something universal. It was the voice of someone completely unafraid, someone in control of the situation. More importantly, it was the voice of a predator addressing another predator with respect rather than challenge. The Shadow Stalker's ears flattened against its skull, another sign of confusion. In its limited experience, other creatures either attacked or fled. This human was doing neither. He was standing his ground without aggression, claiming space without challenge. It was behavior the creature's instincts couldn't categorize. Slowly, deliberately, Tae-ho extended his right hand toward the Shadow Stalker. Palm down, fingers relaxed. It was a gesture that meant nothing to the alien students, but everything to the predator. In the complex language of territorial animals, it was a signal of non-aggressive dominance. The Shadow Stalker stared at the extended hand for a long moment. Its 6 eyes tracked the human's movements, looking for any sign of deception or hidden threat. Finding none, the creature took a cautious step forward. Professor Veltan's academic mind raced to understand what he was observing. Somewhere in his memory, he recalled reading about Earth's ecosystem structure. Humans weren't just apex predators, they were pack leaders. They had evolved to command the cooperation of other predators. Dogs, cats, horses, even creatures that should have been competitors had been drawn into humanity's extended pack structure. Was that what was happening here? Was this human somehow invoking that same primal recognition? The Shadow Stalker moved closer, its head lowered, but its eyes still fixed on Taeho. When it was close enough, it extended its own head toward the human's outstretched hand. For a moment. The 2 apex predators were almost touching. Then the creature did something that shocked everyone conscious enough to witness it. The Shadow Stalker lowered its massive head and pressed it gently against Taeho's palm. It wasn't submission. Submission would have meant rolling over or exposing its throat. This was recognition. One apex predator acknowledging another. Pack behavior from a creature that had never been part of a pack. Taeho's expression didn't change, but his hand moved, slightly, briefly scratching behind one of the creature's ears. The Shadow Stalker's eyes half closed, and a sound emerged from its throat that was almost like purring. "Good," Taeho said softly. "You're okay. Nobody's going to hurt you." The words were as much for the watching students as for the predator. Nari's plates began to separate slightly as her panic decreased. Gilsu's skin flickered back toward transparency. Even Mi Young's leaves started to rustle again. Du Hyun found his voice first, though it came out as barely a squeak. How is this possible?" Taeho glanced back at his classmates while keeping one hand in contact with the Shadow Stalker. "Predators recognize predators," he said simply. "We're both hunters. We understand each other." Professor Veltan stepped forward carefully, his scientific curiosity overcoming his caution. "Remarkable. In all my years of study, I've never seen interspecies predator recognition like this." The Shadow Stalker's head turned toward the professor, but it didn't move, away from Taeho. Its 6 eyes studied the crystalline being with interest, but no aggression. Whatever territorial claims were being made here, Professor Veltan wasn't seen as a threat. "It's not that unusual," Taeho said, continuing to maintain contact with the creature. "On Earth, apex predators often avoid direct confrontation with each other. It's more efficient to share territory than to fight and risk injury." As if to demonstrate his point, the Shadow Stalker moved to sit beside Taeho, positioning itself so it could watch the rest of the room while remaining close to the human. Its posture was relaxed but alert, like a guard dog on duty. Wonbin began to stir, his large eyes blinking open slowly. When he saw the Shadow Stalker sitting calmly just a few feet away, he started to faint again, but Taeho's voice stopped him. "It's okay, Wonbin. Just stay still and calm. It won't hurt you now." The small Catherian trusted Taeho completely. If the human said it was safe, then it was safe. Wonbin remained on the floor but stopped panicking. Gilsu found his voice next. "What's it thinking? Can you tell what it's thinking?" Taeho considered the question while studying the Shadow Stalker's body language. "It's confused, but not threatened. This is new behavior for its species. Shadow Stalkers are solitary hunters, but right now it's experiencing pack dynamics. It's trying to figure out where it fits in a hierarchy it never knew existed. The creature's head turned toward Tae-ho at the sound of his voice, and its tail moved in what might have been a friendly gesture. The deadly blade at the tip was carefully held away from everyone in the room. "Pack dynamics?" Professor Veltan asked, his academic interest fully engaged despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Humans evolved as pack hunters," Tae-ho explained. "We coordinated with other predators to take down prey larger than ourselves. Over time, we learned to communicate with and command other species. Dogs, horses, even big cats in some cultures. We became the leader species." Nari's plates had relaxed enough that she could speak again. "But this creature isn't from Earth. It doesn't know about human pack behavior. Predator instincts are universal," Tae-ho replied. "The basic patterns are the same whether you evolved on Earth, Zephyria, or any other world. Alpha recognition, territorial respect, threat assessment, these are built into every hunting species." The shadow stalker seemed to agree with this assessment. It stretched out on the floor beside Tae-ho, positioning itself like a massive, lethal pet. Its 6 eyes continued to scan the room, but now it seemed to be watching for threats to the human, rather than looking for prey. Professor Veltan slowly approached, moving with the careful steps of someone who understood he was in the presence of 2 apex predators. "This is unprecedented. I need to document this behavior for the Academy. You might want to fix your containment systems first," Tae-ho suggested mildly. As if summoned by his words, the classroom door burst open. Station security rushed in, wearing full protective gear and carrying energy weapons designed to stun large predators. They stopped short when they saw the scene before them. The shadow stalker was lying peacefully beside a human student like some sort of enormous house cat. There were no signs of violence, no injured students, no chaos. Just a predator and a human sharing space like old friends. The security team leader raised her weapon uncertainly. "Sir, what's the situation here?" Professor Veltan held up a hand to stop them. "Stand down. The situation is under control." The security chief looked skeptical. "Sir, that's a Class 4 Deathworld predator running loose in a classroom full of students." "It's not running loose," Tae-ho said calmly. "It's exactly where it's supposed to be." The shadow stalker's head turned toward the security team, and it made a sound that was unmistakably a warning growl. Not aggressive, but clear in its message. These new arrivals were not welcome to threaten its chosen pack leader. The security team took a step back. Whatever they had expected to find, it wasn't this. "How do we proceed?" the team leader asked. "Professor Veltan." Before the professor could answer, Tae-ho spoke to the shadow stalker in the same calm tone he had used throughout the encounter. "Time to go back home. These people need to fix your room." The creature looked at him for a moment, then rose to its feet with fluid grace. It moved toward the containment area without being forced, without being threatened, without any coercion at all. It simply walked back to where it belonged because the pack leader had asked it to. The security team stared in amazement as the shadow stalker positioned itself in the center. The hours following the incident were filled with activity that bordered on chaos. Station administrators arrived to investigate the system failures. Technical teams worked to prevent another cascade error. Medical staff checked every student for signs of shock or trauma. Security personnel filed reports that they admitted sounded completely unbelievable. Through it all, Tae-ho remained calm and helpful, answering questions with the same quiet patience he brought to everything else. The shadow stalker, safely contained once again, seemed equally peaceful. It lay in its enclosure, watching the activity with what could only be described as mild interest. Professor Veltan found himself at the center of the investigation, trying to explain what had happened to officials who had trouble believing his account. How could a mid-tier predator from a Class 4 death world simply choose to cooperate with a student? How could a creature known for its aggression become docile in the presence of a human? The academic implications are staggering, Professor Veltan told the station director, an elderly Centaurian named Administrator Kesh. This suggests that predator behavior patterns are far more complex than we previously understood. Administrator Kesh, her 4 arms managing multiple data tablets simultaneously, looked skeptical. Are you certain there wasn't some form of technological intervention? Perhaps the human had a sonic pacifier or pheromone dispenser? I scanned. Him myself, Professor Veltan replied. No technology, no weapons, no chemical enhancement devices, just natural human behavior. The statement hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they knew about interspecies interaction. Meanwhile, the students from the Advanced Predator Studies class had gathered in the Academy's common area. Word of the incident had spread quickly, and students from other species and classes kept approaching to ask questions. Gilsu sat with his skin in a constant state of nervous flickering as he tried to explain what he had witnessed. The shadow stalker just listened to him, like it was a pet or something. Nari's 4 arms moved expressively as she described the scene. But it wasn't like domestication. It was more like recognition, like they understood each other on some fundamental level. Wonbin, still shaken but determined to understand, kept asking the same question. How did you know it wouldn't attack you? Taeho, sitting cross-legged on one of the common area's soft cushions, considered his answer carefully. The other students waited with genuine curiosity, their earlier fear replaced by fascination. I didn't know for certain, he admitted. But I understood what was happening. The shadow stalker was behaving like any territorial predator when it suddenly finds itself in an unknown environment. It was assessing threats and establishing dominance. Mi-young's leaves rustled softly as she leaned forward. But why didn't it see you as a threat? Because I didn't present myself as one, Taeho explained. Humans learned a long time ago that there are better ways to deal with predators than fighting them. Sometimes you avoid them. Sometimes you intimidate them. Sometimes you make them part of your pack. Do-hyun's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue color. Pack behavior again. But how did you know that would work with an alien creature? Taeho smiled slightly. Because hunting and survival instincts follow universal patterns. Whether you're a shadow stalker from Zephyria or a wolf from Earth, the basic social structures are similar. Alpha recognition, territorial respect, pack hierarchy, these concepts exist wherever predators evolved. A new voice joined the conversation. That's a fascinating theory. The students turned to see Professor Veltan approaching, his crystalline form reflecting the common area's warm lighting. With him was a distinguished-looking Altarian female wearing the deep blue robes of the Academy's administration. This is Dr. Yera, Professor Veltan said. She's the Academy's head of behavioral studies. She's very interested in what happened today. Dr. Yera settled gracefully into a nearby chair, her movements precise and economical. I've read the initial reports, but I'd like to hear your perspective, Taeho. What you accomplished today challenges several fundamental assumptions about predator behavior. Taeho looked around at his classmates, then back at the professor. I'm not sure I accomplished anything special. I just applied what any human would, know about dealing with territorial animals. But that's exactly what makes it remarkable, Dr. Yera said. Your species has intuitive knowledge about predator psychology that we've been trying to understand through scientific study for decades. Nari's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Is that why humans are so good at space exploration and first contact situations? Because you understand predator behavior? Partly, Tejo agreed. But it's more than that. Humans had to learn to cooperate with everything on our world, not just other humans. We developed pack strategies that included multiple species. We learned to read body language, understand territorial instincts, and find common ground with creatures that were completely different from us. Gilsu's skin became fully transparent as his curiosity overcame his nervousness. What was your world really like? I mean, for daily life? Tejo thought about how to explain Earth to beings who had evolved on peaceful worlds. Dangerous, he said simply, but also beautiful. We had to be constantly aware of our surroundings. A walk in the forest meant watching for predators, checking for venomous creatures, staying alert for environmental hazards. But it also meant seeing amazing wildlife, experiencing the complex relationships between different species, understanding our place in a larger ecosystem. That sounds terrifying, Wanbin whispered. It could be, Tai-Ho acknowledged, but it also made us adaptable. We learned to see patterns, to read situations quickly, to find solutions that didn't require violence. When you're sharing a planet with creatures that can kill you, you get very good at communication and cooperation. Dr. Yera leaned forward with obvious interest. And you believe these skills translate to interspecies contact? I think they have to, Tejo replied. The galaxy is full of different species with different instincts and behaviors. Understanding. Predator psychology is just one tool, but it's a useful one. Most conflicts happen because different species misread each other's intentions or feel threatened by unfamiliar behavior patterns. Professor Veltan nodded thoughtfully. That explains why humans have been so successful as mediators and peacekeepers in galactic society. You instinctively understand the behavioral patterns that other species struggle to recognize. The conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from Professor Veltan's communication device. He checked the message and smiled. The containment systems have been fully repaired and upgraded, he announced. We'll be able to resume normal classes tomorrow. Will the Shadow Stalker be okay? Mi Young asked, her concern genuine despite her earlier terror. Better than okay, Professor Veltan assured her. The creature seems remarkably calm. The technicians report that it's been more relaxed and cooperative than at any time since it arrived at the academy. Tejo wasn't surprised by this news. It has a context for its situation now. Before it was a solitary predator in an incomprehensible environment. Now it understands that it's part of a pack structure, even if it's an unusual one. Dr. Yera made notes on her tablet as Tejo spoke. Would you be willing to participate in some additional studies? What happened today could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies communication. As long as it doesn't interfere with my regular classes, Tejo agreed. I'm here to learn, just like everyone else. As the group began to disperse, Wanbin approached Tejo hesitantly. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you actually dangerous? I mean, you seem so gentle and scholarly, but today... The small Catherian struggled to find the right words. Tejo considered the question seriously. I'm a human, he said finally. We're all dangerous when we need to be. But we're also capable of choosing not to be dangerous. That's what makes us human. One bin nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense, though it would have terrified him a week earlier. As the days passed, life at the academy settled into a new normal. Classes resumed with enhanced safety protocols, but the biggest change was in the students' attitudes. The alien students looked at Tae-ho with a mixture of respect and fascination that hadn't been there before. More importantly, they began to understand that dangerous and threatening were not the same thing. Tae-ho was undoubtedly capable of violence. His handling of the Shadow Stalker had proven that. But he chose cooperation instead. He chose to be gentle, scholarly, and helpful. The Shadow Stalker, for its part, became the most well-behaved specimen in the Academy's history. It participated willingly in demonstrations, seemed to enjoy the educational simulations, and showed a level of intelligence that surprised even Professor Veltan. During one memorable lesson, when a new student asked if the creature was truly dangerous, Tae-ho had walked up to the containment field and placed his hand against the barrier. The Shadow Stalker immediately came over and pressed its head against the same spot, their communication clear despite the energy barrier between them. "Dangerous?" Tae-ho had said to the class. "Absolutely. But danger and friendship aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes the most dangerous allies are the most valuable ones." Professor Veltan often found himself watching.